Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me today. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the PAS Report website, pasreport.com. And I have a phenomenal guest today. I have Mr. Bill O'Reilly, No Spin News, BillO'Reilly.com. He's here to talk about his new book, Confronting the Presidents, No Spin Assessments from Washington to Biden. Mr. O'Reilly, pleasure having you here. How are you today?
I'm the same, Nick, which is tragic for everybody. I'm overworked, but thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm about halfway through your book, and I have to tell you, the amount of research you did for this book is great. We've had about 45 presidents, Grover Cleveland serving 2 separate terms. And the one thing I have to ask, did you find a common link, common leadership qualities, decision-making capabilities amongst the presidents?
No. They're all unique individuals who came at it from different points of view. And that was number one. So when I wrote Confronting the Presidents, 45 different chapters, because there are 45 men involved. And I wanted to humanize them, number one. So we tell you about who they are, what they eat for breakfast, how their relationships are with their kids, with their wives, and all of that. And then we bring in what they did, what they didn't do, their skill set, and how crazy some of them were, and on and on. But first, above all, I wanted to demythologize these people, because in America, once you get to be president, you're either demonized or mythologized, and people don't really know who you are. But is there a common thread that all 45 have? No.
You just touched on something very important. We tend to have this nostalgic view of the past. We forget that these were ordinary men, and some became statesmen. They rose above it all, but they weren't perfect men. So in your research, were there any surprising flaws or personal challenge that some of these presidents faced?
Sure. I mean, George Washington and his mother didn't like each other. And Washington didn't even go to her funeral. And that all stemmed from when Washington's father died, he left the estate to George, not to his wife. And George was in charge of doling out the money to his mom, and his mom said, I'm not getting enough money from Georgie, and wrote letters to the Virginia newspapers scorching her son, who was in fighting the Revolutionary War, driving him nuts. So these kind of human stories is the link to the folks. It's because we all have, family intrigues. We all have things in our lives that are unsettling. Teddy Roosevelt and his oldest daughter, Alice, she drove him nuts. She's a teenager trying to sneak boys into the White House, smoking on the roof. It's like people go, what? This is really happening? Yeah, they were human beings. And then there was the sordid side of people that surprised me in some instances, like Lyndon Johnson. I was alive when Kennedy was assassinated, and Johnson takes over. And I always thought Johnson was a middling president. He booted Vietnam, no doubt about it, but he did some good things in the civil rights arena. This was one corrupt SOB. He was corrupt top to bottom, this guy. And when we started researching him, we're going, what? And it's all on the page. So that's the worthiness of confronting the presidents. You get the truth.
Yeah, and it's amazing. After all these years, I've been teaching political science for years, and I find that I'm still learning things. And as you research this book, you learn new things. But I want to stick with the nostalgia for a second, because we tend to make it as if our politics were more dignified and cordial in the past, that it hasn't always been as ugly as it is today. But is that really true? Has our politics really changed all that much?
Haven't changed at all. I mean, Thomas Jefferson ran against John Adams when Washington retired, and that was one of the nastiest campaigns in our history. I mean, the stuff that was put out by Jefferson against John Adams and vice versa was, the difference was you didn't have a social media or a television or radio to carry the message. So the newspapers did it, and most people couldn't read. in America back then. But if you trace it, I mean, nobody got it worse. I tell Donald Trump, because I've known him for so long, and I wrote a book, The United States of Trump, on him. I said, look, you're not the most vilified president in history. That was Lincoln. What Lincoln got was unbelievable. So you're second, Trump is second, but you're never going to catch Lincoln. So this hatred, and that's what it is, has continued from the early 19th century to today.
Yeah, and there were a lot of contentious campaigns that got really ugly. You know, you talk about Adams, then you have John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson and the battles back and forth. Our politics has been brutal since the beginning of recorded history. I mean, you know, it's a bunch of jackals when you look at it. But Bill, we got to take a quick commercial break. So we're going to talk about this more when we get back, because I want to get into the founding fathers and the presidents and whether or not they kept the vision that the founders intended alive. So everyone, hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So, Bill, in your opinion, when we look at the presidents and we look at the founding fathers, what presidents deviated most from the founding fathers' vision of America?
That would be Joe Biden.
And how so?
Biden, in my estimation, is second worst president because he created problems. Most of the bad presidents, like Herbert Hoover, John Tyler, these people, Franklin Pierce, Buchanan, they inherited problems they made worse or couldn't deal with. Biden created the problems. So the founding fathers, what they wanted above all, Nick, was the federal government to protect the citizenry. That was job number one. Okay? They weren't interested in social engineering. Slavery was obviously legal. Okay? They wanted protection. That's why we have a Second Amendment. Okay? Where you can have arms. Americans have arms to protect themselves. And the federal government is not to intrude on that. Okay. So what Biden does, first day in office, is he violates immigration law, okay? He changes everything that Congress passed to protect Americans from foreign nationals coming into this country unattended. We don't know who they are or where they're going. That was an unbelievable blunder and so opposite what the founding fathers wanted that it's staggering. So that's just one example. There are many presidents who went against the philosophy of the founding fathers. But Biden and the progressive movement has taken it to the highest level I've ever seen.
Oh, without a doubt. And you see the ideologues that the historians out there, you know, a poll came out a few months ago saying that former President Donald Trump is the worst president and Biden is above Reagan. He's in the top 10 and he's past Reagan. What do you think about, you're a historian, what do you think about when you see quote unquote scholars pushing that nonsense?
Well, they're not scholars. They're ideologues. So people believe what they want to believe. I mean, that's the overriding arch we have in this country. And you can present them with facts all day long, Nick, and they're going to go, whatever, man. It doesn't really matter. But I'm a disciplined journalist and a historian, and I evaluate what happened. So I'm a traditional guy. I'm a registered independent. In Confronting the Presidents, Barack Obama comes off as a pretty good president. And some right-wingers, I said, hold it. I mean, read the book. Read what the guy made mistakes, all right? But he corrected. He course corrected the mistakes. And the Obamacare, which was so controversial, the right didn't like it, that has benefited and still remains in place, okay? Trump could have tried to knock it out. Trump did not. It has benefited millions and millions of Americans. So what I do is I look at the benefit of policy to the folks. And I don't care what party you're in, but to say that Joe Biden has been a better president than Ronald Reagan, when you see something like that, you just go, okay. It's like a 7-year-old going, Daddy, a Martian just came and landed in the backyard. You go, okay, let's go out and see, you know, but you don't take it seriously.
No, you can't take it seriously at this point. There's a lot of things. We at least need humor. I mean, at least we could hopefully keep that going.
You got to handle it that way. I mean, I don't get angry anymore. I used to get a little feisty, but not anymore. Maybe that's with age, I don't know. But if I disagree with somebody, I ask them questions. If they answer the questions intelligently, then I respect the disagreement. If they don't know anything, which is the case much of the time, then I just go, have a nice day. That's it. I don't get up. It doesn't bother me.
Well, now, when reading your book, I didn't get to the Obama section yet, but when it comes to President Obama, one of the things I was really disappointed in was the whole race. I think that he could have done so much, being that he was the first black president. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you raise a very interesting point. He let his emotions dictate his racial pronouncements, which was a mistake. And he's usually supremely disciplined. He's usually not an emotional guy. All right. So I think he realized, and he did apologize for the Harvard thing with Gates, the professor up there, when Obama didn't have all of the information and condemned the Cambridge, Massachusetts Police Department. I think he knew. Trayvon Martin thing was a little bit different. There were no good guys there. Trayvon Martin was a troubled teenager. Zimmerman, who killed him and was acquitted of murder, was absolutely looking for trouble. And Obama should have not gotten involved there, but he was emotional about it. And when you let your emotions dictate, Nick, you know this, your decision-making clouds. But I don't let that define his presidency. He's the hardest working president in modern times, Barack Obama. That guy worked his butt off. And he wanted to do good things. And I know that because I actually worked with him on a program called Your Brother's Keeper, which is a mentoring, successful Americans mentoring inner city youths from very poor homes. And that is a great program. He didn't take it to where I think he could have taken it, but it's still in play.
I remember when you and President Obama announced that program, and it certainly is a great program. I wish it was expanded on. It certainly could have been expanded on. A lot more could have been done because it's so beneficial when we look at what's going on in our inner cities and the fatherless homes out there. Now, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we get back, I want to do some quick hits with you, so everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So, Bill, let's do some quick hits. Who do you think was the most underrated president of the United States and why?
Well, it's got to be James K. Polk. And I've got him way up there in good president land because he was the guy who expanded America from Atlantic to Pacific Ocean. And that was the Mexican-American War, which we won fairly easily. And we should have won because Mexico was paying you know what, and had no right to do what it was doing in Texas. So Polk, he was dying while he was in office. Nobody knew it, but he did. But what he accomplished by just expanding the United States at very little expense in money or in blood was extraordinary. And now, today, nobody knows who he is. You go out, Nick, today to your students and go, hey, how about that James K. Polk? And they'll look at you and go, yeah, he's a rapper, right? Isn't James K.? I like him. Nobody knows anything about it.
It's funny that you say that. I make my students write down. I say, if you could have any president throughout U.S. history to be president today, write down on a piece of paper who that president would be, and you can't select the president from your lifetime. And then I'll go and write 6 names on the board: Washington, Lincoln, JFK, FDR, Teddy Roosevelt, Reagan. And normally I'm pretty spot on. That's where everyone's going to go. And I say, well, there's 45 presidents. These are the only ones. What about Calvin Coolidge? What about Dwight D. Eisenhower? And they're just clueless. They don't know.
Yeah, they don't know anything about them. And that's a public school system because they don't teach anything about them. It's not the urchins' fault primarily. But I have to say that with the cell phone and all that, they're not really interested in hunting out information. I say to, when I'm doing a press tour for Confronting the Presidents, if you know younger people, say ages 15 to 25 in that zone, who really love their country and they're interested in their country, you give them this book. They'll learn more in this book than they learned in all 4 years in high school, okay? And at least they'll have a frame of reference about how the country was forged and who ran it and how successful or unsuccessful they were.
Well, and to your point, one of the things that frightens me is how little Americans know about the country that they're living in. And every semester I give this citizenship exam. Most can't pass it. They don't know about our history. I then give a constitutional exercise where I give them the Russian Constitution, but change it to the United States everywhere. They can't identify that they're not reading the American Constitution. And even worse, we see the anti-Americanism being pushed. How, as a nation, can we survive if the younger generations don't know about the country they're living in, and some are even taught to despise it?
Well, that's the way the ruling class wants it, though. You have to understand, politicians don't want an alert citizenry. It's much easier to rule them, govern them, if they'll sing for the propaganda, like fair share. Well, what's my fair share? And then they'll tell you. All I want to do, and on both parties, too, is just feed out this propaganda machine and have it accepted by voters who don't know very much. And that's what I've devoted my life to doing on the no spin zone. So I knock that stuff out easily. It's not hard to knock it out. I mean, you see a person like Kamala Harris, for example, providing no specifics, no solutions to any problem. I don't even think she understands the problem in the first place. And then you see Trump with the hyperbola throwing stuff about dogs and cats being barbecued, and you're going, what the deuce is happening here? Because the power brokers know that most Americans are locked into a set of beliefs, but they don't even understand why. And that's why people like you are so valuable to the country, because we've got to get their attention and say, there is a factual basis for our freedom. You got to understand what our freedom is why it's there, and how we can keep it, and reject the charlatans.
Yeah, you can't defend what you don't know. And if they're not being taught it, that's a big problem going forward. And that's why
Absolutely.
I think it's so important for them to understand what makes the American identity, what it means to be American, and the idea of America and exceptionalism. It doesn't mean that we dismiss some of the past sins. We still talk about the past sins, but America is an exceptional nation. And many of our presidents understood that. So now, in your opinion, who was the best president and why?
Well, Lincoln by far and away, because he was handed a fait accompli on the Civil War, which was the worst thing that's ever happened to America. And if Lincoln hadn't been in the White House, this is why I believe in God. So you come off the worst president of all time, James Buchanan, the guy who was in office before Lincoln from 1856 to 60, and who was a coward. And he refused to take any action against the South, which was growing in ferocity, arming itself, abusing Union officials, doing all kinds of stuff. I have a letter from Harry Truman that says if Andrew Jackson had been president in 1856, there wouldn't have been a civil war, because Jackson would have come down and kicked the butts of the burgeoning rebellion. And he would have.
Yeah, Old Hickory he was a tough one.
Right, he would have. So Lincoln comes in, and he's got all this craziness, and he understands that we might not have a country now, because the Confederates want to be their own country. And he wins. And how he wins, I wrote Killing Lincoln, a whole book on it, was extraordinary. In the meantime, his young son dies in the White House. His wife's a nut. And after Lincoln was assassinated, she actually gets put into a mental institution. Mary Todd Lincoln, my God. He's dealing with all that. And this is something you should show your students. When he walks into office in 1860 from Illinois, show them a picture of him. And then 4 years later, show them when he got assassinated. It's not like the same human being. So he got through it, and he saved the nation, and nobody else has come close to what Lincoln did.
Yeah, it really is amazing. And when you look at it and then compare it to today, and that's why it's so important to understand our history, what are your thoughts on the current presidential election and where we're headed as a nation?
See, I don't think it's about Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. I think it's about traditional America versus progressivism. And therefore, if you don't want a drastic change in this nation, if you believe that our traditions are our strength, which I do, you can't vote for Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is Bernie Sanders. They believe that this country has been exploited by white men, the white patriarchy, they call it. And it's got to be broken down, every part of it, including the economy. and that the central government in Washington controls every aspect of American life, all right, totally counter to the Constitution and the Founding Fathers. That's what the progressives want. You see it. No bail, violent criminals unpunished, high taxation on a certain amount of people, take all their assets away from them, give the assets to other people with no strings attached. It's just mind-boggling. That's what the progressive movement wants. All right, so I'm voting against the progressive movement. Kamala Harris is just a tool. She's a machine politician. On the other side, you got Trump, who is a traditional guy, and we've seen it because he governed for 4 years, but he doesn't have discipline. So his message is clouded. And I don't know whether he understands, I think he does, the grave danger posed by Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, AOC, and these people. Because if they get power, Supreme Court disappears the way we know it, Electoral College will disappear. I mean, it will be unbelievably frightening what will happen here. So that's what the election's about.
And any prediction on the outcome?
I don't know. If it were held tomorrow, Trump would win, but it's razor thin. What Kamala Harris's disadvantage is that her support is not rabid. I don't know about you, but I have not heard anybody, even my liberal friends, go, we got to have Kamala Harris in the White House. Have you heard anybody saying that? I haven't heard anybody saying that. It's, we hate Trump. Okay? All right. But that thin support for Harris will work against her as people get more and more nervous about their grocery bills and other things, their insurance bills. My God, they'll go back to Trump, who has demonstrated what he can do already. That's why I think Trump has an advantage as we talk.
Well, it's certainly going to be interesting. We got a few weeks left, and we're going to find out what direction America is heading in. Bill, I really appreciate you coming on. Everyone needs to check out Confronting the Presidents. I'll have links up at the P.A.S. report. You could also go to BillO'Reilly.com. Make sure you check out the No Spin News. Bill, thanks so much for coming on.
All right, keep doing what you're doing, Nick. Really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.